My name is Salena Zito. I'm a reporter at the Washington Examiner Daily Reporter. I'm also a weekly columnist for the New York Post, monthly at the Wall Street Journal, and as Jane pointed out, the author of The Great Revolt, Inside the Populist Coalition, Reshaping American Politics. And so I think it's really important for us to discuss this evening what I really want to lay out to you. A lot of people don't really understand this new conservative populist coalition that makes up the Republican Party. Even those that are part of it, sometimes we don't understand what we're part of and who we're connected to because of how wide and broad this country is. And this conservative populist coalition, a lot of people believed that Donald Trump caused it. I would argue that he is the result of it and that it endures long after his presidency ends, whenever that may be. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about how I understood and first saw this coalition and how I have followed it for the past 14 years. That's a long time. Past 14 years, and I suspect you'll find yourself within this coalition. So let me tell you a little bit about how I report. I do live in Pittsburgh. I fondly refer to it as the Paris of Appalachia. It is the largest city in Appalachia. And I have, when I report, I don't fly, I don't take interstates, and I do not use turnpikes. I always take the back roads no matter where I go. I've driven to all 49 states. The only one I haven't driven to is the one we can't drive to, which is Hawaii. And including Alaska, which is an amazing trip. And so I always use the back roads. I also never stay in a hotel. I always stay in a bed and breakfast. Why? Because first of all, breakfasts are always amazing. But second of all, they're always owned by small business people, and they know where all the bodies are buried in town. It helps me understand what's going on in a region, in a town. And the reason I take back roads is you can see how areas change, how they're either expanding and doing better and prospering, or how they're decaying, and how that impacts culture, but also how that impacts politics. All this leads us to understanding this coalition. Now, when I first had an inkling something different happened, was happening in this country, that the parties were starting to change and realign, was oddly the year that the Republicans lost the House and Senate in 2006. It was in the beginning of 2006, and I was at an Italian Sons and Daughters hall. If any of you have ever been to one of those, it's sort of like an Elks or a Moose. And I'm there to see Jason Altmaier, who was running for the House for the Democrat against Melissa Hart. Now, Melissa Hart had been in Congress for almost 10 years. She was very popular. She was a Republican. And I had zero level of expectation that there would be anyone there to see Jason Altmaier. And then I walked into the room, and it was filled. And I was stunned. And so I started listening and to these voters as to why they were moving away. I mean, because they were conservative voters. They were pro-life, they were pro-gun, they believed in fiscal responsibility, they believed in a strong and robust military. And so I started listening to them and said, are you not conservative anymore? And they said, oh yeah, we're conservative, but we're mad at the Republican establishment. We're mad at the Republican House. We are mad at George W. Bush. We believe that he has spent too much money, that he has wasted too much treasure in the war, and we're looking at candidates to send them a message. And that's exactly what they did. They went to the poll. The Democrats were very smart that year. Rahm Emanuel, whether you like him or not, is a pretty brilliant poll in understanding and getting the pulse of the country. And so he recruited House candidates that were very conservative. They were pro-life, they were pro-gun, they were pro-military, they were pro-fiscal responsibility. And so voters went and they voted for them in those midterms. And I can remember having this conversation with someone on the Bush team, and they said to me, oh, Salena, our voters are going to show up. We have Voter Vault, which at the time, Voter Vault was like the high-tech measure of telling how your voters were going to vote. And I said, oh yeah, your voters are showing up. They're just showing up for the other guy. It was a moment where I thought, you know, voters keep sending a message to Washington, and Washington keeps misreading it. Republicans, establishment Republicans had taken voters for granted for too long, and they rebelled and they voted for Democrats. So what happens when the Democrats get power? Well, 3 years later, Barack Obama is the president, and they're doing things like TARP and bailouts and cash for clunkers and the healthcare bill, the exact opposite of what they told voters they were going to do. So the voters turned around and threw them out 4 years later. And they started to form this coalition that people weren't recognizing. All that the media, all that my profession saw was Tea Party, and they focused on Tea Party, and they didn't understand that there was more than just people who identified with the Tea Party as part of this coalition. There were suburban establishment Republicans that were there. There were blue-collar Democrats that were there. There were voters that don't vote that often that started showing up in these midterm elections. They came in 2010 and they threw those Democrats out. Those same Democrats who went in there as conservatives were then tossed out because they were forced by the party leadership of the Democrats, Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama, to vote on issues that did not reflect the districts that placed them in office. Once again, Democrats misread what the voters wanted, that they thought the voters loved Democrats. It wasn't that voters loved Democrats, they just didn't like Republicans anymore. In 2012, there was an opportunity for Mitt Romney to sort of pull this coalition together. Unfortunately, he did not. That had a lot to do with him not being able to sort of draw out the parts of the coalition that were still sort of missing. That would be conservative and cultural Democrats, people that live in the Midwest and in the South, these and white working class voters. Barack Obama's team did an incredibly good job of taking Mitt Romney's best qualities, which was a good businessman, and turning it into a liability. By the time they were done with the debates and the advertising, you believed that Mitt Romney was not the guy that was going to come and build a new a business. He was going to be the guy who was going to bring a box to your desk and escort you out of the office. And so that's and Barack Obama's team was very good at creating that belief about Romney. Romney was very poor at disputing that notion. And so what you saw in 2012 was that Barack Obama kept white working class voters away from Mitt Romney, but he also kept them away from him as well. And so this coalition was sort of in a holding pattern. Then came 2014, and that was an historic year for Republicans. Not only did they win the Senate, not only did they gain new seats in the House, they won historic numbers in state legislative chambers across the country. State House races, state Senate races, and also row offices, judicial races. It was the biggest year ever for Republicans. And what everyone sort of missed is that the last thing that this new coalition was hungry for was any one of those 17 establishment Republicans that stood on the stage with Donald Trump in 2015, August of 2015. They missed that sort of need for something that had nothing, that had no tangible ties to the establishment. Now, this isn't just about politics too. This is also about culture and about skepticism. And are we still there? Because I lost the screen. Oh, there we are. Sorry about that.
I was trying to remove myself from the picture, but I'll stay here.
Yeah, no. I just got confused by that for a moment. And so what they missed in that moment, in that sort of moment, was this coalition had been building for 10 years, 12 years. And they kept misreading this coalition. And they didn't understand that it wasn't just about politics. It was also about skepticism and mistrust with large entities, institutions, big tech, Hollywood, sports entities. All of them had placed pressure on these voters to conform and be part of the Democratic alignment. And these voters wanted nothing to do with this. And so in August of 2015, I can remember watching Donald Trump go down the escalator and think, no way, a gold escalator? He's completely misreading this moment. And then he starts that speech. Now, if you remember, all the media reports about that speech had to do with something about hating Mexicans. If you actually listen to that speech in full context, that's not what he said. And if you really listen to that speech, it is almost the exact same speech in terms of theme and passion that Bill Clinton gave in October of 1992 when he announced he was running. It was about communities, connection, having your back, being left behind, and the dignity of work. And all of that was missed by my profession. But I'm listening it through the ears of someone who grew up in Pittsburgh and saw the devastation of some of these economic deals that were done by establishment Republicans and Democrats. And I was like, oh, this is something. And when I understood that Donald Trump was going to win the nomination was the night of the first of the caucus in Iowa. If anybody knows anything about caucuses, you're essentially in a one big room. Sometimes it's like a church hall, a church basement, a school, whatever. There's anywhere from 100 to a couple hundred people in the room. And you go into the room and typically people write on their hand the first 4 candidates that they like. And the reason that they do it is because when you do a caucus, it's all out in the open. And if your candidate doesn't pass the threshold, then there's some horse trading that happens afterwards, and people try to get you to go with their candidate because your candidate might have failed. So you usually go into a caucus with about 4 people written on your hand. And I was sitting outside, where was I? In Davenport, Iowa. It was so cold. And I was sitting outside talking to there's a group of gentlemen, there was about 6 of them. And they always say in Iowa that the Republican caucus, it has some evangelical Christian and conservative Catholics in the coalition. No, that's dead wrong. They are all evangelical Christian and conservative Catholic. So I start talking to these guys and I asked them, so who's first on your list? All of them said Ben Carson. Oh, okay, well, I have Ben Carson. Oh, well, he's just like us. He shares our values. Second person, Bobby Jindal. Across the board, it was Bobby Jindal. Why? Well, he's just like us. He shares our values. Third person, Ted Cruz. Oh, well, we don't really like him, but he does share our values. And the fourth person was always Donald Trump. And I remember thinking, how does a three-time married, Playboy dating, Howard Stern regular connect with these evangelical Christians? And they said, oh, because he's just mean enough to go to the mattresses for us and on the things that are important to us. And it was in that moment, it was in that cold January moment that even though Trump did not win the Iowa caucus, he came in second to Ted Cruz, I knew it was that the primaries were over. If he had all those other tenets of a coalition, and he's now just added evangelicals, he has a good coalition to win this the primary. And that's what he did. While my profession dragged it out a lot and sort of did a lot of dramatic, like, oh my God, it might be John Kasich. Well, I mean, he won one state, and I think it was Vermont. Oh no, Ohio. He won part of Vermont. Or it might be Ted Cruz. No, it was not going to be Ted Cruz. Donald Trump had done an amazing job of understanding delegate math and had built a good bank of delegates up heading into the end, to the stretch, going into the end of the primary. It was in July of 2016 that I took a drive across my state of Pennsylvania. Now, of all of you who have followed electoral politics all of your adult life, you know that every night on election night, there's Wolf Blitzer. Pennsylvania's behind him on a map. It's blue. He says it went for the Democrat, as they have done every year since 1988. And he said, and you all just assumed for 30 years that Pennsylvania was just staying Democrat. What people missed was that Pennsylvania had become 0.4% more Republican every 4 years, by the way, including this year. 0.4% more Republican every 4 years. What does that mean? Bill Clinton won my home state, 28 of the 67 counties. By 2012, Barack Obama had only won 13 of those 67 counties. So that erosion was there. So that was already in the back of my mind. I drove through all 67 counties. I stopped and interviewed people in counties that I identified that could swing the election. And this was done through a lot of anecdotal reporting, which is, you never know. I mean, you do, and you get a feel for things, but you don't know if that reflects an entire county. But the other thing that I saw in 2016 were the signs. And there were campaign signs everywhere, and they weren't the kind where you go down to the local headquarters to pick up a sign. They were homemade, and they were everywhere. And they were in places that they shouldn't be, like Luzerne County, Erie County, Northampton County, Fayette County. All of these counties, which have been Democrat for my entire life, had Trump signs. They also painted houses, barns. I even saw a horse with Trump painted on the side. So I knew something very different was going on. And when I talked to people, I started to pick up and understand what each archetype of voter was part of this coalition. So I wrote a story for the New York Post, and I essentially said, here are the 10 counties in Pennsylvania to watch on election night. And if there's only 2,000 more votes in these 10 counties, no matter what happens in Philadelphia, he's going to win the election by about 40,000 votes. And then I said, the election is essentially over. Y'all just don't know it yet. In September of 2016, by the way, I really took a lot of flack for that on social media. It wasn't pretty. In September of 2016, at the time I was working for a Pittsburgh newspaper. They decided at that time that they were going to go in a different direction. So I had to take a buyout. As I was walking out of the newsroom weeping, because newsrooms are like this, like land of the misfits toys kind of family place, right? I'm walking out of there. I get a text from the Trump campaign, and they said, do you want to interview candidate Trump tomorrow? And I said, sure. But inside of my head, I'm like, I don't have a job. I have nowhere to do the story. But I called the New York Times. They said no. I called the Washington Post. They said no. I called one other entity, and I forget what it was. They also said no. But the Atlantic ended up taking the story. And it was in that story that I asked then candidate Trump about the seriously, literally, which Jane pointed out in the beginning. And that quote made a lot of sense to me, because I spent a lot of time at rallies with voters, and I watched them, and they did take what he said very seriously, but they didn't take every word that he said literally. And my profession took everything that he said very literally. We are trained to do that, but they didn't take him very seriously. And one of the things I think is important to point out is, and I explained to you earlier about how I approach reporting. I think this is why I also understood why Trump was going to win, but I also understood I started to really have a deep understanding of this coalition. When I would cover a Trump rally in 2016, and in 2020 as well, a little less thanks to COVID, but when I would cover a rally, I would go to the town where it would be at least 2 to 3 days ahead of time. I would always stay in the bed and breakfast, and I'll get to know a town. I'd get to know the people, what the issues were, hang out. I would go to a local football game or whatever was in season at that time. And when I arrived at the rally, I had an understanding. I would usually get there about 6 hours early, and it was like a tailgate party or Dave Matthews Band concert. Like, people were happy and they were throwing beach balls, and it was this like very joyous thing where other reporters, especially for the major news networks, they would fly out of DC all together on a plane, take the plane and get it to the destination. They would usually stay at the Marriott by the airport. They would all arrive 7 minutes before the event. And journalists, we're trained to pick up on the unusual. Unfortunately, if you're only in a rally for 7 minutes, the unusual tends to be the weirdest person that's there. So if you were sitting at home, every reporter was essentially putting the same package up every night. You would see like the 7 same weird people, not the other 24,000 normal people, but the 7 weird people, and they would focus on them. And then they would focus on 4 things that the president said that were taken out of context, and he sort of sounded like, a crazy man. And you would be sitting at home and saying, well, geez, they're all crazy and he's not going to win. And that, I think, is why a lot of people were really shocked in 2016, because they really didn't have clarity on what was going on with this coalition. On election night, so between that interview with Donald Trump on September 19th of 2016 and election day, I essentially worked for 4 different newspapers, writing 4 different stories every day. Until election day, and also incredibly poor because there's not a lot of money in freelancing. But I wanted to finish that election. I had been there from the start, and I thought it was important to finish it. On the night before the election, I can remember this so clearly. I interviewed Mike Pence in in the tarmac in Pittsburgh. And I remember going home and crying, thinking, not because he said anything terrible, but because I thought, wow, I just interviewed with likely the next vice president of the United States, and I don't have a job after tomorrow. The next day was election day. I covered the race for the New York Post. I can remember sitting at the table in Pittsburgh at the Republican headquarters with what I call the celebrity journalist. And they're all watching Philadelphia and those returns, and I'm watching my 10 counties. And I remember filing my story at like, I don't know, very early that night, because I understood that he won Pennsylvania, because the 10 counties that I needed, I expected him to get 2,000 more votes. They came in just as I anticipated, and I understood that he won. And after that, the next day, I can remember waking up, I cried again, and because I didn't have a job. And I also felt like a lot of Trump voters in that moment. I was, at the time, I was 57 years old. I didn't have, I knew my career in journalism was over, and I knew my profession was dying. And I knew I'd probably have to work 2 to 3 jobs to make up for what I lost from my old job. And so I decided to walk to the bakery next door to my house. I was a good baker. I figured I'll make, cookies. Well, it was a French bakery. Apparently that's a little bit different. I was walking down to the bakery when I got a phone call from CNN, and they asked me to be on Jake Tapper's show. And I, of course, said, why? What did I do? And they said, well, you were the only reporter that consistently understood this election. And we want to have you come in and talk about it. And they also hired me that day, to their great credit. After that, I came on to the Examiner of the New York Post, and eventually wrote the book. When I did the book with Brad Todd, it was really important for us to truly understand and chronicle this coalition so that people understand and understood who it is. It's still today an incredible blueprint for understanding what is happening with conservatism. I will say that, so what happens next? What's happening now? In 2020, I think beginning in January, if you would have asked me what the election was going to be about, I would have said the impeachment. Trump's going to win. Democrats really failed on that. In February, if you would have asked me at that time, I would have said definitely the economy. The president's going to win by a landslide. When COVID hit, it was a slog from that moment on. Not because of how he handled it, but just because of all of the walls sort of caving in on a lot of things with COVID, and all the uncertainty that it created. And I would argue that COVID probably is what, if it is determined, if Joe Biden is inaugurated in January, that I would argue that COVID was probably ultimately what cost the president the election, and sometimes his comportment in how he handled it. One of the important things I think people should really understand about the election results in 2020 is that the conservative populist coalition that formed before Donald Trump even decided to run for election, not only is larger, it's broader, it's more durable, it's stronger, it's browner, it's more diverse. If you look down ballot at some races, at a lot of races, I mean, look at the US House. It is stunning what happened in the US House. Up until the day before the election, Democrats and pollsters were predicting a double-digit gain by the Democrats in the House. Even Republican strategists thought that that's going to happen. That's not what happened. Republicans have gained, there's still a couple out there. I believe that the number right now is 15 new House seats. They did not lose the Senate. Tom Tillis, Susan Collins, who were supposed to lose by astronomical numbers, did not lose. Republicans, not just Donald Trump, but Republican candidates gained larger support in both the Black community, but also in a wide range of Hispanic community and Asian communities. This had a lot to do with a message that they kept repeatedly hitting on aspiration, but also in support of police. That was important. Not packing the courts, also not important. But a broader message on economic prosperity, on pro-life, and on judges, and a warning about the perils, excuse me, of big tech and big government, was much more effective than what Democrats' message of their message of defunding the police, their message of packing the courts, their message of free college or college forgiveness, and of gun control. That doesn't resonate with aspirational Americans, no matter what color they are. And they really misread and really misunderstood the Hispanic vote. Republicans have to not blow it, but I think that they have earned these voters into this coalition. I think one of the things that is really important to understand about this coalition is the impact that culture has had on it. Large businesses, let's take a step back here. Let's think about how business used to be 50, 60 years ago. Most businesses, even big business, let's take Hoover vacuum cleaners. It's a perfect example. Mr. Hoover lived 4 blocks from his plant. He walked to work every day. He knew not only everyone that worked for him, he also knew who his customers were and who bought his Hoover vacuum cleaners. He sat in the pew and went to church with them. His wife was sat on the school board. Corporations were connected to community. That is incredibly important. They weren't located in far off zip codes. Mr. Hoover would have never dreamed of scolding someone for a political view. That's not true today. Our larger cultural institutions or corporations are located in super zip codes in places like Silicon Valley and New York and Washington, D.C. and Chicago. Let's take the NFL, for example. This is a perfect example. The NFL is located in Park Avenue, New York. You can't get more super zip code than that. And they made a decision in 2016 when Colin Kaepernick decided not to stand for the national anthem. At first, not to do anything. And I would argue had they had someone in their corporation who was from a state school, or lived in Canton, Ohio, where the Hall of Fame is, rather than Park Avenue, they would have had a better understanding of the impact of what Kaepernick did. It wasn't just that he didn't stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. It's just that he didn't even do the contract he signed. If you had someone pragmatic and practical in your boardroom who would say, excuse me, Mr. Kaepernick, page 9 of your contract. See, right here, you signed it right there. Yeah, you signed it and it said that you were supposed to, stand for the national anthem. Now, if you want to negotiate this next year, that's fine, but this year you have to do it. Or wait, you don't want to? that's fine. We'll just, rip the whole contract up. Of course, you're not going to get your $90 million, but we're good, right? Because if any one of us had broken a contract with our employer, that's pretty much what they would have done. But these corporations have sort of secluded themselves in these super zip codes, and they're surrounded by people that are just like them. I have argued forever and a day, there needs to be not just racial diversity in our government, in our politics, in our corporations, in Hollywood, but there also needs to be cultural diversity. There needs to, I look around in some of the newsrooms, there needs to be someone in a newsroom that's pro-life or owns a gun. How can you write a story about guns if you've never held a gun? If you don't know how it works, and you think AR means something that it's not. We need that diversity because we don't have that cultural diversity. We don't understand who we're reporting on, or we don't understand who we're selling tickets to, or we don't understand who's watching our movies. And instead we look down on them or there's condescending. And that has led a lot also to the formation of this conservative populist coalition. And so I think I'm ready to open it up for questions if you guys want to.
Thank you, Salena. That was a lot of questions. I'm sitting here listening to you about journalism, and you're kind of old school journalism because you're actually curious. But after the election, after the the 2016 election, I remember hearing, all the journalists were gonna go out into America and find out what happened and look at things differently. And I don't really see that happened. I think we're more in our silos than ever before. Can you talk a little bit about what's going to happen if we continue in that direction?
Oh, I think we will just continue to be more polarized. The attempt was to do all these great big think pieces. But what happens is if you parachute yourself into a town and you know nothing about the people and you know nothing about the culture, what you end up doing is making fun of people. Not even on purpose, but if you really want to write about a town, you've got to spend a few days walking in their shoes. I mean, I wrote about coal miners. I went down in a coal mine. I went down a mile underground and 7 miles horizontally. I can't write about a coal miner if I don't experience what a coal miner does. And I think there's too many journalists that sit at home or a lot of us are stuck at home, but who sit behind a desk and make great big assumptions, or they parachute into a town and they take their mindset and try to infuse that into a story about someone that is completely different than them. And there's so many stories that I read, in particular about where I live, that is so insulting. And it just really, really makes me mad.
Do you ever challenge your colleagues plainly about creating stories rather than reporting on them? Is there any discussion professionally about that?
I don't do that. I'm not the most confrontational person. And I also left social media. You can't do it anymore. It really can't be done in an honest way anymore. People aren't open to an honest discussion. Now, if I was in a newsroom with a bunch of people, we would have those discussions when I used to work in a newsroom. But I don't work in a newsroom anymore, and people are way too sensitive to have a discussion about, like, gee, did you ever think to ask this person this? Why did you just assume that about them? And one of the things that really irritates me is the assumption that if you didn't attend college, that there's some sort of lack of intelligence there. I believe that only 34 34% of Americans have a college education. There's a lot of very successful people out there that didn't attend college. And that's one of the things that sort of rubs me the wrong way.
A great deal of snobbery and snarkery, I would say.
Yeah, that doesn't, I don't really react well. I think I get hives from that.
Yeah. You know, our members are wondering, is there sort of one news voice? Is there one main man behind the curtain that kind of tells all the journalists what to say and where to go? Because it all seems so bullet pointed and it all gets repeated.
Well, I have always been blessed with editors that tell me to go find a story, that don't tell me what story to find. And I think as we get more news deserts in this country, as more smaller newspapers are disappearing, and more bigger corporate news organizations are formed, these news organizations aren't dedicated to journalism, they're dedicated to a bottom line. And they want a specific story. And they have editors that ask for a reporter for a specific story. I have never, ever been told, go find this story. I've always had editors that have trusted my judgment to tell me, go tell me what's happening.
Salena, just this week, Jeffrey Zucker was kind of outed from CNN by James.
Well, by full disclosure, I'm still a CNN contributor.
So what are your thoughts about the fact that they were basically giving out talking points and requesting a story? Is that typical? Is that?
I think that is. I think as newspapers become larger, that's the norm. This is the story we're looking for. It's, a lot of journalists will point to, oh, I saw, the Watergate movie. Now I can't even think of the name of it. All good. I forget. Anyways.
All the President's Men.
Thank you. Oh my God, I couldn't think of it. But that editor kept pushing, go find the story, go find the story. And once you get up into corporate media, it's a lot different than that.
Yeah. I keep thinking, wouldn't there just be one lowly intern who would be able to say in the newsroom, that just seems a little odd, or how about this? But it doesn't seem to happen.
You can do, there's that freedom in a smaller newspaper. When I worked for the Pittsburgh Tribune Review, there were robust discussions, sometimes very noisy discussions about a story, sometimes yelling. But that is kind of what a newspaper, at least when I'm coming up in the news world, that's what newspapers were about, like that give and that take between the editor and the reporter. But, technology has changed everything in our lives, and it has led, I think, to this moment.
You used the word misread earlier. You talked about the misreading of the Trump voter, and the Trump voters' motivations in particular have been assigned to being racist. And I'm kind of wondering whether there's now not a current misreading of people who have lost faith in our healthcare experts. So when people are walking around without masks, is there another misreading of a coalition for people and assigning people the attribute of selfishness? Is this a similar misreading?
No, I think the not wearing of masks has to do with that part, that nugget in the coalition that that just doesn't trust our expertise. Expertise, like Americans had great big trust in government in 1968. That was the last year that they had great big trust in government. At that point, I think it was 72% and trusted that the government would do the right thing. 67 or 68, the last year of Johnson's presidency. And then sort of the unraveling in Vietnam, that we started to drop at that moment. And then Watergate then began to cause our trust to get even lower. And we have been on the spiral ever since. Our trust in media and the government, I think, is at like 17% right now. It's not just conservatives, by the way. Democrats have that as well. They just aren't as vocal about it as conservatives are. This is very important to conservatives, that government and media and culture have colluded and failed us on a number of different issues.
And do you think that that's part of the reason why there's not more investigation around this potential fraud in the election?
I think that my profession really, because they've never taken Trump seriously, that they don't take his allegations seriously. They have never taken his presidency seriously. They've never taken the voters that put him in office seriously. And I think that it is as simple as that.
Okay.
They just want him, and they want all of you to go away. What they have completely misread is that, in part because of that attitude, this coalition has only gotten bigger and stronger. I mean, you have to understand that, if you look at some places, there are places in Western Pennsylvania where Republicans won down ballot in state legislative and races, House and Senate, but Trump didn't win those same districts. He did have a problem with his comportment with some voters. The voters that probably cost Trump this election are senior citizens. That had a lot to do with, I would point to that debate on September 29th, between that and COVID. That is where he lost his biggest amount of support, was among senior citizens. They didn't like his comportment on it, while younger conservatives liked his vigor with how he handled COVID, a lot of senior citizens did not, because they didn't have the same vigor personally that he did. They weren't able to fight it in the way he did. And there was a little projection there about them not being able to overcome the disease in the same way that he did. They also lost family members. COVID took a toll on this, on his election. Now, I will say that on September 30th, when people asked me what was going to happen, I said, I don't think he can win. I don't know if he can battle back. He did battle back. He was, from October 1st until election day, he was an animal. Like he was on point and had it right all the way to the finish line. But I did always believe that this election was going to be a jump ball. I thought it was going to be a couple points in either direction. I never believed that Biden was up 8, 9, 10 percentage points. There's no way. I spent time in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania and Ohio. There was no way that was going to happen. But I did believe that it was going to be a jump ball going into election night.
Which makes us all wonder where we are today. But the image of the jump ball, Salena, those two guys jumping for a ball, that's going to forever be in my head.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I like it. It's funny.
They don't even do in basketball anymore, do they?
I don't know. It's probably maybe it'll hurt somebody's feelings. I don't know. One of our members says, "It's interested to know where the rank and file union members land in the support of in the Popular Coalition and Trump support. It seems the union support, other than SEIU, for Biden was muted in 2020. Do you agree?"
So this is why everyone should buy my book, The Great Revolt, Inside the Populist Coalition, Reshaping American Politics. The first chapter is about union support for Trump. And he didn't lose those voters. If they were over 65, he did, but rank and file, active rank and file, he didn't. He was very well supported by rank and file.
So, since you have your finger on the pulse of Pennsylvania voters, one of our guests asks, "What are they now saying about Trump's alleged loss? Is there outrage?" You recognize there's outrage in our audience.
There's a mixed response, for sure. If you ask everyone in my family, they're all outraged. It's a mixed response. As the weeks go by, people have started to like, oh, I guess he did win, meaning Biden. Or they're like, Trump won, but there's nothing we can do about it. I think the biggest problem may have been what happened before the election. Ballot harvesting is a well-known sport in Democratic politics in Pennsylvania. And you really have to have boots on the ground to prevent that. And they didn't have that, meaning the Trump campaign. I can assure you that Mitch McConnell does have that because he's from Kentucky. He understands that, and he does have that in place right now in Georgia. The ballot harvesting is traditionally the way that elections are, shenanigans happen. Sorry, cat. So yeah, I mean, there's a mixed response from voters. Everyone is incredibly sad and disappointed. A lot of people are angry. A lot of people are outraged. Sort of the same mix of variety of emotions that you guys feel as well.
Okay, so just to step away from the election, which enrages everybody for minutes, there's a question about, do you really drive everywhere, Salena? And tell us a little bit about what your approach is when you land in a town.
So my last car.
How do you really get that information?
Yeah, my last car was a Jeep Liberty, had 400,000 miles on it, and I had it for 14 years. It died the day I came back from Wisconsin writing my book, like the last day of writing my book. So my approach is when I go to a town, I always do obviously a lot of research before I go there. But then I usually put my atlas in the car and I pick either US routes. Traditionally, I try to stay on old US routes like US 30, like the Lincoln Highway, or 20, which go across the country. There's also there's a great highway called 62 that literally goes from the Canadian border to the Mexican border diagonally across the country. But I usually just get on the back road and I spend most of my time observing, seeing how towns and areas change. It's really important in understanding what the sentiment might be in that area. And I usually just pull up to a local eatery and sit down, and I've never had a problem talking to people. And it usually comes from listening to them for a while before I start talking to them. And most people, they're genuinely want to tell their story. Even if they think their story is boring, they think their story is important. Americans are great storytellers. We have a great long tradition of that from all of our ethnic backgrounds. So it's not all that difficult to get people to open up and tell their story. And I think all those stories are very important. I mean, that's why I call my my columns the middle of somewhere, because I can remember this so clearly. Bill Crystal, who works for the Bulwark now, but at the time worked at the Weekly Standard, and he tweeted once that he, you know, that fans of the Eagles and the Patriots must be insulted that they had to go to the middle of nowhere to watch this, to see their teams playing the Super Bowl, because the Super Bowl that year was going to be in Minnesota. And I was just very struck by how insulting that was, because to me, everywhere in America is the middle of somewhere. This is America, and you know, I don't think that any of us should call any place the middle of nowhere. We're all equally important in very unique and different ways.
Salena, where do you see this going? Where do you see this coalition that you've described so well in your book and for the last few years going? You say it's growing.
Yeah.
What should we look for?
Well, I think that 2021, I keep an eye. I wrote about this today. Oh, you guys can check out my stories at salenazito.com. You can sign up for my emails. They're free, they're fun, and they're not fattening. I wrote today about Attorney General's race coming up in 2021. Really, really important. Those are sort of the insurance for Republicans in states. It's not really been talked about, but the Republicans won the majority of Attorney General races across the country. And they're looking at Virginia next year. One of Virginia, Iowa, Wisconsin are the upcoming state attorney general races in the next year and next 2 years. These are not sexy races, but these are really, really important races. I expect to see, if this coalition stays together, and I can't see why it wouldn't, because the thing that pulls it together the most is the reaction and the attitudes of Democrats and government and culture and Hollywood and sports and corporation towards people that are on the outside. As I look at it, just continues to be more hostile and antagonistic. That only grows this coalition more. I think the Republicans are going to have an amazing midterm. 2022 is going to be a banner year for Republican candidates. They're going to be able to recruit good candidates. I would be shocked if there wasn't a wave election. I expect to see the Republicans in the House have the majority, the Republicans in the Senate keep the majority, and governor's races are just going to be insanely good for Republicans. Pennsylvania is going to be the center of attention. We not only have a governor's race, we also have a U.S. Senate race. Senator Pat Toomey is retiring. I expect that Sean Parnell will probably seek that seat. He's proven to be a very sharp and smart conservative warrior and sort of the face of this new coalition. And also, I expect to see state chambers to become more Republican, House and Senate seats.
Well, Salena, I'd like to ask you to close by saying, when you talk about this coalition, what would you describe as the one or two top values that you think are spreading and have been growing?
One of the things that's very important to these to this coalition, and I think you all probably see that in yourselves, is that this pushback about in this sort of growing big government of the Democrats. I mean, look in your state of California and all the big roles and restrictions that have placed on us. There's going to be such a coming together over. People are going to have this sort of moment of reflection, I would say, within the next couple of weeks. to say, we gave up a lot of our liberties and we're not going to do that anymore. And I think that's going to grow this coalition even stronger. I think that's one of the biggest shared values. I think one of the other bigger shared values is this just sort of rejection of how culture, big tech and culture treats this coalition. What they don't seem to understand is every time they try to, take this coalition out by its knees, whether it's on social media or in various uses of technology, it only makes it stronger. It doesn't weaken it. And so I think those are two really important themes that are in the forefront of this coalition.
Well, Salena, my sense is that if more journalists were like you, if they were actually journalists, if they were curious and fair and paid a little attention to what some people call flyover country, which happens to be where I'm from, I think this country would be in a very different situation. But I'm so heartened to hear that you think that the coalition is growing. And I thank you so much for joining us this evening for a very generous and warm program, particularly doing it in the middle of your move. You've just been
sorry for not great background.
I just expected you to be sitting on boxes with masking tape coming out of your hair tonight. So
I might still be sitting on a box. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you. It was an honor to be here.